shows us one side of Jesus Christ. And it's a side that we spend a lot of time dwelling on because it's a side that is the Jesus of faith, the Jesus of the religion that we follow. It is the Jesus that lifts our spirits in that very, very powerful sense. And of course, John was sent to proclaim to the world that this is the person who is God's child, and he's here for a purpose. Although I don't purport to be a biblical scholar, I do spend a lot of time reading about Jesus, particularly that side of Jesus that has a historical connotation. I find that very fascinating. There are books been written about the historical Jesus, the Jesus who was the political activist, the revolutionary. And to some extent, I don't think a lot of us spend a lot of time looking at it. And one of the reasons is there has been actually so little hard evidence from a historical perspective of what Jesus did and said. We go to the Gospels, and the Gospels are a retelling of the story, because the original story of Jesus Christ wasn't written down. It was spoken. It was like communities like the one we have right here, of people who were nascent Christians. They didn't even know what they were. They were Jews, but they were changed Jews. You know? And in that change, there was this natural development towards something powerful, but they didn't know exactly what it was. What they did know is that they wanted to follow the teachings of Christ, and it was passed down verbally among these communities. And finally, decades later, these things started to get written down. And people had variety of reasons why they wanted to write the stuff down. And one of the lesser reasons was a history. Most of it had to do with the developing of this powerful new religious and spiritual concept and feeling that was starting to spread out through that particular area of the Mediterranean. Now, I envision a historical Jesus who lived and died trying to reform his society. Unlike Karl Marx, who is not to be confused with Groucho Marx, who dismissed his religion and only spoke of social revolution, Jesus lived, he breathed his faith, and died attempting to integrate faith within a social context. Now, Jesus' core teachings, and I mentioned this the last time I was up here, I have dug around and dug around and dug around in the Bible, of course, and other books written about Jesus Christ. And the one thing that absolutely amazes me is how simple the basic teachings of Christ were. Like, I can find about 9 of them. We might be able to dig up 1 or 2 more out there, but 9 of them are the ones that I've got. And what's the first major teaching? What is the first thing that we have to do in order to be successful Christians? Love God. Okay, that's the foundation. Love God with all your heart, love your mind, with all your strength. Because in loving God, we set down that foundation so that we can do the next thing, which is what? Love each other, you know. And one of the things that's so fascinating about Jesus' message was, look, folks, if you do those 2 things right, the rest of it doesn't matter much anyways, because it'll just come along. And that's what faith is all about, right? It's about coming along. But you got to have a feeling that what you're doing is right. So love God, love each other. He had a lot to say about remaining true to each other, particularly in relationships of marriage. So read that if you want to know what Jesus had to say about marriage. Remain true to each other. Forgive each other. Forgive each other over and over again. People make mistakes. If they come to you with contrite hearts, if they come to you asking for forgiveness, as a Christian, you must forgive them and find a path to the future. Another thing he says is, do not judge others unless you're willing to be judged. He doesn't say don't judge. It's just, if you're going to judge somebody, then you better be able to take the heat yourself. Okay? Treat each other with fairness and compassion. And this one, along with the first 2, sets the tone of what Jesus wanted to do in his revolution. Because he wasn't so much about equality. I think if you read the Bible, you read about Jesus, he still talks about slaves, he still talks about people who are landowners, he talks about the wealthy, he talks about Caesar, and he doesn't talk negatively about them as long as they're doing some basic things, and that's treating the people they're responsible for with fairness, with righteousness. Okay, so it's not necessarily equality, it's equality of spirit. But he understands the political connotation in the world that he lives. He doesn't ask for perfection in that environment of us, but he wants us to treat each other fairly. Another major thing is share your good fortune and your wealth. So that if you are lucky enough, or smart enough, or hardworking enough to be a person who ends up making a lot of money, you got to share that money. You got to turn around to your brothers and sisters who aren't that fortunate, who have all kinds of issues in their lives, and be willing to make sure that there is an equitable distribution of wealth out there. So that one or two or three or four or a few hundred people don't gobble all this stuff up and leave the rest dragging in the dirt. I mean, look at our society we live in today. There are people out there that have $52 billion all by themselves. It's their lunch money. They get to do what they want. Now, we pray and we hope that they share some of that money with those people who are in need. But I think all of us understand that that sharing is not equitable. And in some cases, it's getting worse and worse. Somehow, the wealth that certain individuals can accumulate is not being used out there to help those that aren't. And that's a core thing about this community, and I'll get back to that in a few minutes. The next thing I saw was be an active agent for God's goodness. It doesn't do much good if all we do is sit in our chairs and pray and say, I'm so blessed, I'm so thankful, I am so happy, I am so good, I don't get into trouble, I am just a wonderful person, God loves me. That ain't enough. You've got to get your butts out there and you've got to do things for Jesus. And that doesn't mean you have to go out there and proselytize, close enough. Okay? You don't have to go out there preaching the gospel. You just got to do good things. You just got to go out there and be the kind of person that you want to be. And you know how much that satisfies your inner soul. And that again is faith, because Jesus says, look, you go out there, you do these things. I promise you there is a reward for that. Now, don't do it for a reward, but I promise you that there's a reward for that. And we know ourselves that that reward really starts within ourselves. How good we feel when we go out and do even the smallest kindness. It's kind of sweet. The smallest kindness to the people around us. And how that expands our universe. If this church is going to survive, it will not survive because people get up and start talking about how great this church is. It will survive because people in this church will do things that are so good that others will say, my Lord, where are they coming from? Oh, they're Christ the servant people. Well, I want to be part of that because it is really cool. These people are doing really good things. So that's the core thing we want to really grasp. And finally, and boy, I love this. You know, you get into some of the stories in the Bible about this aspect. Do not run your church as a business. That's different from running your church like a business. By that I mean, sure, you need to have good control. You need to make sure that the money comes in properly. You make sure that it's vetted. You make sure that things are properly done in a proper environment so that everybody understands how the money's spent, how things work. That's got to be done. But you don't turn around and create an industry out of your church. You don't enrich yourselves through your religion. I mean, he went absolutely nuts over that. Because we always think of Jesus as this really kind, complacent shepherd guy. You know, who walked around kissing babies. But when we read the story about when he went into the temple and he cleared it out, why did he become so enraged? He became enraged because they were making money off his father. They were making money off the church. They were selling stuff to people and saying, look here, this chicken here is a sacred chicken. And the only way you can do a sacrifice to God that is worthy, you have to buy this blessed sacred chicken for 5 times what it's worth. If you went over there and just bought a chicken in the market. So poor people would walk in with their money because they wanted to sacrifice to God. They give it to the priest and say, I have to have that sacred chicken. They wouldn't have enough money to buy a chicken they could eat at home. That drove him nuts. So that's the kind of stuff we want to make sure this community never gets into. I don't think it can, actually. I don't think it's set up that way. Now, the big question. Why was Jesus crucified? Why? Help me out with this. He was a radical. He challenged the established priesthood and political elite with a faith-based social paradigm. Big words. So radical that it would have dissolved the power relationship between them and the people they subjugated. Those are powerful political words, but that's basically what it's all about. He stood up and he said, these are the things that we need to do to change the way we behave. And they went, whoa, 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 buddy. You mean we're not going to be able to do this, this, and this, and this money can't be spent this way, and we can't wear these kind of robes, and we don't have these kind of temples, and this stuff all falls apart just because you want to share with other people? Are you nuts? Okay, so that's kind of the feedback you got. Now, what's interesting about Jesus is that he wasn't a Christian. Never was. Born a Jew, died a Jew. To some extent, his journey was not about religion, as it was about changing the world around him for fairness. In that case, it was a faith-based social revolution, but not of a violent nature. He was structuring this revolution on the first two core values. By loving God with all our hearts and mind, we can discern what is of God and what is of man. And that's so important. We've got to do that all the time. What are we doing that is truly of God? And what are we doing that is of us, of human beings, human frailties, human failures? And Jesus is saying the second thing is by loving each other, we can really now share in God's bounty. You have to love each other in order to share. It's almost impossible to share with somebody you hate. But if you love them, it's easy. It's no problem. So there's the other foundational thing that he gets onto. Jesus is saying that many of the laws described in the Old Testament were not of God but of man. As a result, they could be changed or done away with if they interfered with the distribution of God's bounty and social equity. It's not what goes into the mouth that defiles, but what comes out. That's Mark 7, verse 17, and it comes up in a couple of other of the Gospels. Jesus used Jewish food restrictions and laws as an example. We just talked about that. How the priesthood monopolized sacrificial giving by ensuring constant, considerable revenue flow through this process. Jesus had a lot to say about sharing, but this is an interesting thing. It sort of conflicts with some other perceptions of sharing. He did not require tithing. He said nothing about tithing, and he said nothing about religious sacrifice. He said some interesting things. What did he say about the old lady that came to the church? Do you remember that little story? What was the idea behind that? Let me help you here. Go ahead. Yeah. She gave up. What she gave was very small in relation to what was coming into the church, but it was all she had. And that is the true sacrifice. Okay? It's not the sacrifice if you're a billionaire, you can walk in with $1 million. What's that hurt? None. It's a tax write-off. It's when you walk in with something and give it to people, and it really hurts. But again, it's not money we're talking about here. It's actions. It's taking the time out of your life, time that you would rather spend watching TV or a football game. So don't worry about it. Don't think, oh my God, I make $10,000 a year and I got to give $9,000 to God. No. It's just spiritually speaking, give of yourself, obviously, till it hurts a little bit.